Ace Combat 3 is a rather unique game as it was released by Namco and has been split apart into two separate regional specific releases, the Japanese release and the international release. And when I say split apart, I don't mean staggered release dates like most games had back in the day. But what I mean is that there are actual significant differences in content between the Japanese and global versions of the game to the point where it nearly ended all of the hype for the game in the West. The Japanese game had fully voice-acted dialogue with 52 missions featuring split paths that were based on decisions that the player made, and it had a story centered around the intercorporate war of Yuja. The international release for the game only had 36 out of the 52 original missions and made the game much more linear in nature. The story, voice acting, and cutscenes were all stripped out of the game, reducing it to a very basic plotline, which did affect the release of the game. This is mostly seen in the review scores, where those that played the Japanese versions of the game praised it for the things that I mentioned before, with a lot of the scores being rather positive, with Famitsu giving it a 31 out of 40, while the international release was often seen as disappointing for just how bland the game really was, with the lowest score coming from UK's Next Generation magazine giving it only a 2 out of 5 rating. Thankfully, in the modern age, Ace Combat fans are really dedicated to their games, and thanks to Project Nemo and other groups like Load Word Team, they have managed to put together multiple English patches for the Japanese version of the game, so that way those that are in the international market can see just how truly good Ace Combat 3 really is. Of course, before we check out the rest of the game, we need to know its story and what we are fighting for. Taking place in the year 2040, sometime between January 1st and July 21st, the national governments of Yuja have decayed entirely and were replaced by multinational corporations. These two corporations are General Resource Limited, a company that has existed for many years across Strange Real, and their competition being Neucom, a company that focuses on emerging and often experimental technologies. In an incident called the Faith Park Dispute, Neucom had claimed that General Resource was attempting to limit their growth and threatened General Resource directly. The Neo-United Nations stepped in and talks were held where the Yusian continent was split up, with each group having a specific area where they could operate in. Of course, it was only a matter of weeks before Neucom started to expand their activities into General Resource territory, which then General Resource asked the NUN to step in, and while they were having their discussions with the officials at Neucom, the GRDF were dispatched to run surveillance on Neucom facilities at all times. Neucom would respond, of course, by starting to prepare their own response force, which just added to the tensions that were growing in the nation at the time. This forces the NUN to bring in UPEO, or the Universal Peace Enforcement Organization, to strengthen the sanctions in the continent at the time. However, as UPEO arrives in the continent, Neucom would vector transport flights directly over General Resource-owned territory, and this time they were escorted by their own highly advanced fighters. The NUN would deploy a Special Armed Response Force, or SARF unit, to intercept the encroaching aircraft. Expo City would end up taking a ton of damage in this ensuing battle. The damage that was caused from this battle would force the NUN to tighten sanctions further and establish no-fly zones over every single major city in Yuja. This would prove ineffective, as in early 2040, Neucom would float their transports once again over Expo City. This is where the Nemo comes in, dispatched with a UPEO squadron to shoot down the transports that were flying in. Of course, you cannot have an aerial combat game without, well, planes to fly in it, so we should take a look at the new aircraft. The first thing you will notice, unlike Ace Combat 1 and 2, is the hangar is just a screen, a very basic menu with an image of the aircraft in the top left hand corner. It doesn't show you that it has a camouflage until after you pick it, in which it doesn't have a traditional glass canopy. This is because while the pilot is inside of the aircraft, they are connected to it through the CFFI, or Connection for Flight interface, where the pilot can control the aircraft with thoughts or body movements. The canopy is sealed and replaced with sensor arrays that directly transmit the view of the aircraft right into the pilot's mind or through a set of screens around them. Of course, the aircraft gained the slang term of coffin for their narrow interiors with very little room for the pilot to move. Outside of that, the stats are back down to 5, and are arranged in a pentagon that really does make it look like our aircraft is just a stand, but the air-to-air and air-to-ground stats are moved back into one singular stat, being straight attack. This judges the aircraft's overall combat capabilities, including missile counts. Speaking of said weapons, you also have the ability to swap out missiles and cannons on certain aircraft, from regular missiles to bombs to MIRVs. Don't actually use the MIRVs, they aren't that very strong. But you can also swap out your cannons for a basic Vulcan, a heavy cannon, or a pulse laser on some of the vehicles. While it isn't the full hardpoint changes that we will see later on in the series, it is still a nice touch, and they are automatically changed in flight based on what target you select. The other major thing to note is that your aircraft will be restricted depending on the choices that you make, as each faction in the game has their own unique aircraft, and the game makes it so that way you can only use the aircraft from that specific faction that you are a part of. You also do not have to purchase them, as there are no credits to use in the game, they are just unlocked as you go. While we are working our way through the first few missions of the game, this is where we are going to take our time to talk about the new additions to Ace Combat 3. The first thing to note is that the game has full DualShock analog support, so one of the things you can now do is look all the way around your aircraft in a 360 view. This is a great addition as it lets you, well, look around to see the details of your chosen plane, but also keep track of things like missiles that may be approaching you. Another major thing that was added was lock-on tracking, or as they call it in the game, RPC or real-time perspective camera. Holding down the button to swap targets will focus your camera onto the target that is chosen. This is very helpful in combat situations where you have multiple aircraft buzzing around, and does often let the player keep track of the enemy instead of flying aimlessly around in circles trying to figure out where they are. This would become standard in Ace Combat games afterwards. One thing that I'll personally mention is the heads-up display. It is fully functional in both first and third person, including the gun targeting reticle. I will say though that at a first glance it does look futuristic, but also rather cluttered at the same time. But it doesn't have a massive impact on the gameplay, so it's nothing that will really change my opinion about the game. The biggest change to Ace Combat 3 that the player will notice the most is the shift towards a more realistic approach with its flight model. The player will have to think about energy conservation when turning and climbing, meaning that the player's actions can and will bleed speed much like a real aircraft, putting them at risk of a stall if they fall below 300 km per hour, which these stalls compared to the first two games are a little bit harder to pull out of. This can give the game a slight bit more of a floaty or gravity heavy feeling than the snappy responsiveness of the first two games. One more thing that was added was the rank screen. The player will see that there are times given out during briefings on missions. Sometimes these timers relate to getting a secret new objective, and if left uncompleted, the player will get a mission over screen instead of mission accomplished. This just means that the mission is done and the player will score the lowest rank possible, which is D. Meanwhile, taking out those objectives in time and still doing the bonus while racking up as many points as possible will give us the most score that can secure up to a possible A rank. Now that we are done with basically what amounts to the tutorial for the game, we have to discuss something very important and integral to the story of this game. On some missions, the player will be given a choice that they have to make while in the air. These impact the game greatly and will change which path you go down, in turn changing your potential ending. So instead of doing a mission by mission recap, as that would take forever considering the game has 52 missions, and as much as I would love to take an hour talking about the game, editing Kuro would hate me, so instead I'm going to highlight some of the missions in each of the lines that I personally saw that stood out. One of the things that is returning from the second Ace Combat is that some missions will have a side objective that the player can do that will unlock different side missions, with some reconnecting to the main path and others skipping parts entirely, with a chance of you missing out on some lore tidbits. So with that, let's get into Ace Combat 3's surprisingly simple mission structure. The first mission, and the one that's been playing in the background that sets up the rest of the game for the player, is Paper Tiger, and I'll also be recommending that the player makes a save in their profile underneath the second slot, just to avoid having to play the intro again. Choosing to side with UPEO, the player is seen engaging in peacekeeping operations under Commander Park after the truce that brought out a ceasefire is broken. With missions like a classic ravine run where the ravine is really wide this time around, and instead you are tailing a stealth observation aircraft from General Resource. That leads you towards a secret base, but the mission can also be ended early by shooting down the observation aircraft, skipping a very lore heavy mission. If you decide to tail the observation craft all the way around, You get a mission that gives us a hint about Reyna and the Night Raven, a secretive experimental aircraft, and you are given a choice to help Reyna with her own personal goals or go back home. I chose the former, and the mission turns into a simple air superiority mission with some dialogue scattered about, which for a new player will make them wonder what this Night Raven is and why it's even linked to Reyna. Then comes the pivotal mission, Scylla and Charybdis, and I recommend that the player makes a save here in the third slot of their save list, as a major choice does come up. Delegate Clarkson and Fiona are in a private jet heading towards Neucom territory. The communications are jammed, so they cannot explain what is going on. You are tasked with defending this aircraft for the time being. Then the player is ordered to shoot down the aircraft, which if done leads you down the rest of the UPEO path. Now you only have your two squadron members in Reyna, who plays a massive part in the central plot of the game, and Eric, who is a best friend archetype, but also the type that just wants to fight for what is right. Now, this path does have some unique missions, and one that I really didn't like, so let's talk about a few of them. First off, the mission One-Way Ticket was actually a rather simple mission that involves the player chasing down a train. Then they have to use their cannons, and if you can actually get them to hit, your missiles to take out the different compartments of the train. It is a quick and rather fun mission that just, if you really wanted to, has a little challenge that you're just trying to take out the entire targeted part of the train in a single pass. It's pretty simple, and it's over rather quickly. Then there's the only mission I really despise in the entire game, Bug Hunt. Now, it's not the most overly complicated mission in general, it just entails you dropping antivirus bombs onto these groups of nanomachines that are somehow spread apart really far, and it does sound pretty simple all things considered, but the bombs don't have the best explosive radius, and you can't see what their actual explosive radius is until you drop one, and it will often take you multiple passes, and then they'll hit you with this little effect where they hit you with a virus, and it makes your entire screen blurry and red, and it makes it really hard to see, and it hurt my eyes. It really hurt my eyes, and I didn't like it. But then Reyna gets infected in a cutscene by the nanobots, and then comes the fun job of hitting her aircraft with one of the bombs. It isn't too difficult to do, as she's flying basically in a straight line the entire time, but you do have a time limit, and if you don't do it, it's mission over. Then we are introduced to the main enemy super weapon and the secret faction that is hidden in the shadows waiting to run a coup d'etat, because you have to remember this is Yuja, and what is this part of Stranger without a coup d'etat happening at some point during it? This new faction is Ouroboros, the mythical snake or dragon that eats its own tail as a symbol of destruction, rebirth, infiniteness, and unity. They have brought their airship that oddly looks like a blimp. It is called Spherna, which is a genus of hammerhead shark known for inhabiting coastal waters, and inside of this is your old squadron mate, Reyna. She launches out in the experimental X-49 Night Raven, which looks like a UFO or a boomerang, but is actually a hyper-maneuverable aircraft with a massive laser for a cannon. Yeah, I didn't expect that one either. But instead of attacking you, she turns and attacks the Spherna before the aircraft is damaged and starts hurtling towards the sea. The player is now tasked with shooting down the Spherna and also technically Dijon, but that isn't really all that difficult. It does have sand batteries and guns on it, but they aren't really too dangerous at this altitude. It just takes a few missiles before the massive airship is brought down into the ocean below, and now there's only one thing left to take care of, Commander Park himself. He is trying to escape from the UPEO base, and after eradicating its defenses and damaging the main base, his Osprey begins preparations to, apparently exist. Thank you, emulation, for this. But the tunnel is open, and your job is now to fly in head on and eliminate the man who betrayed Minnie. And with that, the UPEO line is over, Reyna is found alive and being able to remove herself from the Night Raven, and then it just fades to black. This story is considered idealistic to many, and it leaves a lot to be desired. What happened to Dijon? What is the real link between Reyna and the Night Raven? What about general resources in Neucom? What is Ouroboros? It leaves a lot open to the player, but also encourages them to go back to the previous saves and playthroughs to get the whole story, like in Now with the long UPEO line out of the way, we can move on to the only other story that is just as long as it. Siding with Dijon in Paper Tiger, which can be semi-annoying as the man does not fly in a straight line, and even for a few seconds if you do not see joining Dijon on your screen, you can actually just accidentally join UPEO again. And congratulations, if you have succeeded in this, you have just defected to General Resources Limited. A lot of the first part of this line is attacking Neucom structures like Mega Float, while trying to prove your worth to your new allies, in particular Keith, who at first is distrusting of the player. After all, he has worked with Dijon for years, and now this newcomer is here and he doesn't fully know if you are worth the spot in his squadron. Then underneath General Resource, we see the merging of the paths seen in UPEO, with the player now downing Clarkson's private jet and then Neucom deciding to suddenly attack from space, because I guess that's a valid escalation of things. Of course, none of our aircraft are really built to attack in such a high orbit, but you know what aircraft is designed to fly in high orbit? The SR-71 Blackbird, or as they call it, the RF-12A12 Blackbird, because naming is hard, I guess. This is also one of few times in the game where the player will feel that slight floatiness in the control, as it's very exaggerated in this mission, as the lack of gravity mixed with the fact that the Blackbird is not the most maneuverable aircraft in the world does mean it fights you just a little bit when you are in the stratosphere. But there is a mid-mission choice that involves Keith. He is being tailed and cannot shake the Neucom fighter that is causing him to black out. You can either proceed with the mission or dive down to take out the fighter and save your friend. I chose to do the latter and learned very quickly that dive bombing from the stratosphere is a very good way to create a Blackbird shaped snow angel on the ground below. Thankfully, the plane can take a hit or two, and it only took around about 70% damage before I helped my squadron mate and ended the mission. This gets you chastised by Dijon in the dialogue after, but I am not leaving my homie behind. The missions that saving Keith unlocks gives you a little bit more of the story, how Dijon is suddenly acting strange and took paid leave without telling the people where he's going, while being in the middle of an active war. The missions themselves aren't anything spectacular, with the second one, Claustrophobia, involving bombing some bases in the canyons of what apparently is Silent Hill, because it's covered in a very dense fog that doesn't let you see more than like 5 feet in front of yourself. After that, it's an attack on some submarines and convoys in a base in Dilemma, and I recommend making an extra save on this mission in the 5th slot of the profile, as another choice will come up. The submarines are tucked away in the sides of mountain bases, so whatever you do, do not bring anti-ground missiles like I did, because they attack from above. They often will just hit the ceiling above it without damaging the submersible below. After this mission comes your choice, and of course we side with not defecting from General Resource, and now Keith is pretty confused since his squadron mate that he's flown with for years has suddenly decided to betray General Resource for this new faction, Ouroboros. General Resource also introduces you to an important plot point, sublimation, which is a scientific term for taking a solid to its gas state, bypassing the liquid state entirely. In terms of Ace Combat 3 Electrosphere, however, sublimation is the uploading of one's consciousness to a computer software and then uploading it to the aforementioned Electrosphere. In real life, there has been basic research on this technology called mind uploading, but thankfully it hasn't had much progress, so we won't have people running around in the metaverse anytime soon. Of course, while we are taking out some Neucom aircraft and their fleet, we have a little bit of a brain fog, hear some voices, and then get right back into it. Then the Night Raven is launched. Megafloat is destroyed, and now our task is not only to stop Ouroboros, but also destroy the Night Raven. Of course, like in the UPEO line, and a lot of the other lines, the mission involves us attacking the Spherna, which once again, with the special prototyped aircraft that the faction gives us, each one gets a unique one by the way, this is no problem, as you can just dump all 4 missiles into these substructures, and it's gone. Then the player has to fight the Night Raven afterwards in a little tiny miniature boss fight, but instead of it being blown up, you get to see the first of many to be continued screens in the game. Basically, it's a way for the game's missions to be broken up without having the player have to do an entirely new briefing, but it also locks your aircraft to the special given aircraft for those missions. The Night Raven has made its way into the Geofront, which is underneath the Megafloat, and General Resource has deployed 10 detonation systems that the player must destroy, and it's easiest done with the cannon. But you are also dodging fire from the Night Raven itself, which thankfully doesn't do a ton of damage. Actually, I think it did like 7 damage to the back of my aircraft while I was just flying in a straight line. so it's not really that big of a threat. Afterwards, it's a back-to-back boss fight. Once against the Night Raven, the vehicle, despite taking heavy damage apparently, has the ability to pull a full 90-degree turn, which makes it extremely hard to hit, and it will drag the boss fight itself out just a little bit. Plus, there are Su-37s buzzing around that will toss missiles at you when you are trying to focus on the Raven itself. Then you have to fight Dijin himself in the Aurora, which, fun fact, is based on the mythical SR-91 Aurora, which was a rumored aircraft that the US was working on in the late 80s and 90s. It also bears resemblance to the X-47 scramjet. Overall, the fight isn't too difficult, even if I did get shot down once because the amount of missiles that were flying at me were way too much because I didn't shoot down the other fighters that were in the air. God damn it. Once you do enough damage to Dijin and the Aurora, you are treated to a cutscene where Keith sacrifices himself heroically to finally complete his goal of ending Dijin. Then you get a weird dreamlike sequence where General Resource is under attack by Neucom XR900 Geopalia drones, which looks like the beta PS3 controller, but in reality it is a development of them restarting the XR49 Night Raven project, and then the player must do their best to take out these drones, but they are hyper-maneuverable like the Night Raven. After damaging one of the drones enough, the player will manage to transfer themselves to one of them, allowing them to fly around in the XR900 itself. Which, by the way, this is the only time you get to fly it in the entirety of the Japanese version of the game, as it's not an unlockable aircraft in any of the lines, and even with cheats, I don't think you can even fly it. But one of the coolest details is, if you look around, you can actually see your aircraft that you were piloting before gliding along with you. It also lets you fire like 8 missiles with it. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it's fun. Now we have explored General Resource and UPEO. Now it's time for these side branches of these larger stories to start appearing with... The player may choose to defect to Neucom by downing the R-101 that is flying near Clarkson's aircraft. This will lead you down a path where you fly alongside Fiona and her sister Cynthia. The first mission of the Neucom line sees me forgetting about what gravity is once again, and smacking belly first into the ground. If you decide to follow the orders Cynthia gives you, destroying most of the oil tanks and bases, you get the alternate path, which I did not do. Oops. Either way, you meet a quirky scientist named Simon Cohen who seems to know something more about you but isn't telling you just yet, but for now he seems helpful, if not a little bit creepy at times. But the Neucom line is the opposite of the base General Resources line, with you acting against most of the events that occurred in the other timeline, and there's even a cool space mission where you are tasked with shooting down some satellites in orbit using an experimental fighter. Afterwards, there's even a little landing sequence where you have to re-enter the atmosphere successfully, or just do what I did and press start, and put it on autopilot, because otherwise you would have a giant crater in the ground because I am not the best at landing sequences. I learned that with Ace Combat 2. Make a save in the 4th slot of your profile before the next mission. There's a family dispute as we learn Cynthia's sister is an advocate for sublimation, leading to a decision after bombing this GR base. The mission itself would make you believe that it is a low-flying stealth mission. They even say that you have to keep a low altitude, but thankfully the altitude limit is a little bit higher and overall isn't very difficult, as long as you are decent at dodging missiles, as there are SAMs everywhere in this mission. But otherwise it's just bombing some random radar satellites that are just sitting there on the ground. It's nothing too hard, and the bomb radius is actually pretty decent with the spread bombs. Now the player must choose, do you defect to Ouroboros with Cynthia, or do you side with Neucom? Of course, we decide to choose Fiona and Neucom in this playthrough. The usual occurrences will happen in the story and mission structure as it is repeated, but with a Neucom flavor. Ouroboros attacks the Neucom port city, and you are tasked with destroying the fighters that are flying around the Spherna. Damage the Spherna enough that it starts to fall out of the sky, leading to the next mission where you chase it down. You decide to shoot Fiona's sister out of the sky and then battle the Night Raven. The true variation in these missions occurs in the final 3 or so missions, starting with tunnel vision. Unlike in the GR version of events, you have to fly into the geofront yourself. This is a twisting set of narrow tunnels and doors that close down as you approach them. It's actually really intense, and I had a lot of fun doing it, and I'm pretty sure there's somebody out there that has done this with full throttle, but I'm too cautious and too nervous to do that. And I did crash once in the tunnels because I over-adjusted and flew straight into a wall. Oops. But this mission also taught me something unique about Ace Combat 3. The planes that you pilot either have no hitbox in their wings or have a very forgiving hitbox, as sometimes I can glide really close to the wall and my wing will clip right through it, and it doesn't blow me up or do any damage. But if you make it through the tunnel, you are now in the geofront. But the generators around the underside of the Mega Float are powering the Night Raven, making it super maneuverable, but thankfully our quirky scientist friend named Simon comes to the rescue and hacks the Night Raven so that way it is slowed down. But this will only last for a limited time, even though you can hit it while it is in its enhanced state. I don't think it does any damage, but you can still hit it. Overall, the fight against the X-49 isn't that really difficult as long as your missiles remember to connect with the main body of the aircraft, as it is just a giant set of wings basically with a little tiny thin body, and your missiles will sometimes just go flying right past it. But afterwards, it is the same boss fight against Dijon. This time you are fighting Dijon in the geofront, so you have an altitude limit as the ceiling is right there. So mostly the fight consists of flying around in circles until he gets bored and then fighting him in a series of head-ons, almost like he's flying in the Morgan or something. After the final pass, Dijon goes down, and that is it. Neucom is over. With Dijon going down, Fiona mentions that she is leaving Neucom, and then we get a bittersweet ending where she receives one last message from her sister and breaks down from it. Now what if we side with the technical villains of the game? First, we decided to play through Cynthia's story by deciding to side with her in Utopian Dreams. These set of missions are more of a what-if scenario than anything. The first mission in the line has us attacking the UPEO base to extricate Reyna, who is the pilot of the Night Raven, and involves us destroying a lot of tanks and Su-43s. Once the doors are open and Cynthia gets the pilot out, you must defend her from the other fighters in the air, which isn't all that hard. Then there is a cutscene which shows Cynthia's wavering loyalty after having her dreams mocked by Dijon, but also showing that Dijon is a little off his rocker, showing that he doesn't care about others, that he only used the idea of leaving your physical body through sublimation as a way to draw in people to his cause, thus leading to her and Nemo's defection from Ouroboros. Now starts your personal counter-revolution, which ends the same way as the normal Neucom line, taking down the Spherna, Night Raven, and Dijon. The Night Raven manages to escape this time from the geofront. This time the final fight is above Port Edwards, where you must destroy the generators before being able to take on the Night Raven itself, as otherwise the vehicle is powered by the ion energy and is untargetable. Overall, the fight isn't super difficult, and once it is destroyed, we get a creepy cutscene with Simon telling us that we are a good boy. I don't like that. Please don't do that ever again. But this allows us now to take on the final and most impactful Ouroboros pathway in the Dijon route. Back in the frigid submarine base attack mission, we can decide to defect to Ouroboros instead of staying with General Resource. The orientation is the first mission. Port Edwards is reeling from the skirmishes between the GRDF and NEU, so we fly into the city to destroy the freeways and the Neucom HQ stationed in said city. Once that is complete and the mission updates to let us know that there are some Ospreys that are trying to make their way out of the city. You can choose to ignore them for a minute 30 to get the mission liquidation, or destroy them to skip that mission entirely. Then the usual cutscene happens with the Night Raven lasering the Mega Float, destroying it, which I skipped this time because I had already seen it 2 or 3 more times at this point. But now Dijin and Nemo fly towards Expo City to finish off UPEO and eliminate Commander Park. This mission isn't too difficult, and ends the same way that the final mission of the UPEO line does, with a short tunnel run to blow up Park's Osprey, and then the mission is done. But now Reina is starting to get her memories back. Dijin realizes that Nemo had started to give Reina her memories back, and that Nemo started to erase any memories she had of Dijin, thus creating a conflict, and hey look, our boy Keith is back. This dogfight is a long one, as Keith takes on Dijin while you tackle the Raven, and once enough damage has been dealt, a small cutscene will play. Our boy Keith realizes that the Night Raven is a difficult aircraft to take down. Its maneuverability is too much. So in a final gambit, he performs what I can only assume is a War Thunder inspired attack and ram himself into the Night Raven itself. This ends with him lodged into its wing, weighing the light craft down, making it much less maneuverable. Once you regain control, he demands that Nemo shoots him and the Night Raven down, using him as the lock-on point. Once you manage to kill your best friend and the Night Raven, you just have to tackle Dijin, flying around while listening to him talk about the world while you shoot some missiles at him every so often. Major warning before we shoot him down: if you have epilepsy or sensitivity of any form to flashing lights, please skip to the timestamp listed in the description. You chase Dijin into the Electrosphere. This is where the game gets its entire namesake, and the background made me want to vomit at times, as there are a lot of lines and bright flashing lights, and as you go up and down and move around throughout the Electrosphere, there's this weird light streak effect that was first seen in the Bug Hunt mission, and it's just sore to the eyes at times, and if you have any sensitivity to any flashing lights, you shouldn't play this mission at all. Once Nemo manages to destroy Dijin, there's a short cutscene of the world just finding Ouroboros, and then the game is just over. Now you might be wondering, Kuro, why did we just watch you complete 5 different playthroughs of this game? Well, my friend, this is where I mentioned those saves that we made under the 5 different slots. If you have all 5 of the endings present in those different saves, you unlock a secret cutscene. This entire game, all of these stories were all part of a simulation made by Simon Cohen to see if Nemo was capable of destroying Dijin under any circumstances possible. Once that is proven, he releases Nemo into the world, purging you from the Electrosphere, and it is done. So how did we even get to this point? Well, we need our trusty map of Strange Reel and a set of gloves for this one. In order to understand everything, we need to set out 3 central characters in this story. Yoko Martha Inoue, Abyssal Dijin, and Simon Orestes Cohen. Yoko worked alongside Dr. Schroeder of the Erusian Air and Space Administration, who just happens to be Belkin, and of course she worked alongside Simon. After the Lighthouse War, she studied at Excel University and graduated in 2025 with a doctorate in brain physiology. She then joined General Resource, where she studied sublimation. Here she met Abyssal Dijin, and the two of them entered a relationship. Now, on June 14, 2030, while working on said sublimation with Abyssal Dijin, the top brass of General Resource decided by this point that Yoko's work was too dangerous and opted to silence it by eliminating Yoko herself. Dijin was already split off into his Electrosphere version, witnessing things from the security cameras, including his physical body getting a little freaky with Yoko. But General Resource had already planted their bombs and killed both Dijin's physical body and Yoko, letting Digital Dijin exist in the Electrosphere. Enter Simon. As we know, he worked with Yoko and had a hand in working with AI such as the Zone of Endless, which is something that they both had involvement with to some extent. He continued to work on AI for military usage. One of those was the AI Nemo. Originally he joined General Resource, but in 2031 he transferred to Neucom after Yoko's death. While we don't know whether he had a relationship with Yoko or not, we knew that he was very fond of her, blaming Dijin for her death despite the fact that the bombings were carried out by General Resource themselves. During this time, the tensions were rising between Neucom and General Resource Limited as there were slander campaigns and the Neo-United Nations stepped in to keep things calm. Simon at this point decided to create a simulated war between Neucom and General Resource Limited, uploading Nemo to the Electrosphere to evaluate all possible outcomes of the intercorporate war, with all 5 of them leading to Dijin's destruction. Satisfied, he purged Nemo from the Electrosphere and released it into the real world. Now, unlike Ace Combat 2, I will be mentioning some of the extras and bonuses that exist on the disc for the game, and some that the player has to forcibly unlock with cheats or a Game Shark. There's a demo mission that is only accessible via Game Shark codes. For completing the main campaign, getting all possible endings, and unlocking the true ending, the player unlocks the Mission Simulator mode, which is just a fancy way of saying the free mission mode from the other Ace Combat games. For getting all A ranks on every mission, the player unlocks the Aurora fighter that Dijin flies at the end of nearly every path. Also, for getting A ranks on all missions, the player gets access to the orbital satellite laser, which can just one-shot everything in the game, and can also be unlocked via cheat code along with other weapons in the loading screen of Mission Simulator missions. If the player managed to get their hand on the rare Append disc, they can unlock special skins for planes like Reyna's Super Flanker and Dijin's F-15 SMD, along with other unique aircraft like the Night Raven itself. The Omake or Extras mode is unlocked if the player beats the game on easy difficulty and allows you to play through the game with any aircraft without having to unlock them through their branching paths. I don't know if there's any other extras in the game, and you guys can put them in the comments if there are. I know that the International and the JP release had different unlocks. As the International, you can unlock different aircraft, and the Japanese version, you had to have the appendix to even fly the Night Raven. So there is that, and I know there's a few that you can unlock with cheats, but I didn't get a chance to really experiment with that. So at the end of the day, Ace Combat 3 Electrosphere is a wild ride. It gives you minimal information throughout the story, only giving subtle hints that things are just not right, but instead wants you as the player to take the time to do 5 full playthroughs to get things pieced together. It is an ambitious game, there's no doubt about it, and there's also the shift from the normally pretty energetic one pilot saves the world with fast-paced rock music to this more tonally dark, story-driven experience where the world just seems eerie and off-putting. That world is also backed up by a futuristic soundtrack that often doesn't overpower the sounds of the gameplay, but instead amplifies the sense of unease that you get in some of the locations. Like, for example, the music for the Geofront really does remind me of Gygas's intro from Earthbound. It's really unsettling and kinda creepy and makes you kinda wonder, what is this place that I'm flying around in? It's green, there's weird things falling from the sky, I'm under the ocean, but there's also a city down here and there's a city on top. Is this like some weird 40K thing that's going on here where you got like layers of cities and stuff like that? Like, what's going on? It is unfortunate though that we may never see a remake of Ace Combat 3, as in 2014 Kazutoki Kono was asked by a fan about the potential of a remake, and due to the size of Project Ace's team and the efforts required for a localization of the original Japanese version, it would be much more difficult to make Ace Combat 3 again than re-releasing the PS2 Holy Trinity on modern systems. But I can hold hope, and so can you guys, right? The other thing I mentioned at the beginning was just how heavily Ace Combat 3 was stripped down in the West. All of the branching paths, gone. 36 of the original 52 missions are present, and the animations which were done by the animators of the Ghost in the Shell movie, gone. But hey, they get to fly the Night Raven without needing an extra disc, and it's understandable. It would have taken considerable time, effort, and money to translate and cast a game with so many moving parts back in 1999. And also you have to remember that Project Aces, which is what that would become known as in 2001, they were not a very big team in the first place. So is the Japanese version of Ace Combat 3 Electrosphere worth playing in 2026? Honestly, yes. In my opinion, while I enjoyed the more responsive flight model of the previous two games, the story and the twists and turns of it kept me engaged for the entire game, even if some of the missions and plot points were recycled for the purpose of the simulation, just so that way we had a reason to end Dijon for Simon's research. One thing I will say is that it took me a lot less time than I thought to record. I was expecting with 52 missions that Ace Combat 3 was going to take me a lot longer than the 7 total hours that I actually took to record everything. Since now I learned that you can do the smart thing of making multiple save points on a single profile, so you don't have to spend 2 hours playing through every single part that you've already played through just to get to the point where you can hit one of the new branching paths. That isn't mentioning that most of the missions will maybe take you around 2 minutes at the minimum and about maybe 7 or 8 at the maximum. And most of the time that you're playing the game, you're listening to the dialogue and the cutscenes between the missions and not actually flying your plane because you're trying to figure out what in the world is going on in Fuchsia right now. Like, everything is chaotic. Ace Combat 3 is just chaos. Also, now that I've looked at all of the PS1 games, I can say that the PS1 trilogy is definitely a good starting point for the franchise. While some of the games could have gotten worse or better depending on people's own personal preferences, I honestly believe that while there were some moments of 2 steps forward and 1 step back, over the 3 games that are available on the console, there was a considerable improvement between them, with Ace Combat 3 having a lot of the pieces that they would use going into the PS2 era, with more story being tossed in, cutscenes sometimes having live action and sometimes not, and the flight model fueling the next generation of Ace Combat games. But now we are off towards the games that everyone knows and loves, starting with Ace Combat 4 Shattered Skies and the holy trinity of the PS2. So with that, I will leave you here. Thank you all for the support on the recent videos. I never expected my channel to explode like this. It has been quite amazing how much I have been learning about the games from people that are just as passionate about them, especially the earlier games, as I never got a chance to play them myself until now. But for now, this has been Kirill Keat, and I'll see you in the Shattered Skies. Peace.